that sits and learns Torah. We get together. The fact this probably could have never been done before history. This is Mashiach's time. That we could literally, everyone goes on Zoom and we sit and learn the Torah of Moshe. We learn the Alter Rebbe's Torah. We learn Chassidus together. This is Mashiach's times. What Mashiach's times is what? That the whole world's going to be learning Torah. When in your life would you have imagined you'd be sitting from 12 to 1 every day and sitting and learning the Chumash of the day and the Tanya of the day? It would have been ridiculous to you 2 years ago. This would have been unheard of. Right? Everyone on this class. Meanwhile, we have 13 Yidden here. It's on Facebook Live. How many Jews are sitting and learning Torah? That's, perhaps you could say that that's a good sign that the coming of Mashiach is imminent. We're in the Mashiach's time. So we're very close. We got to do a little bit more, take advantage of these opportunities, and that will live in the Mashiach life, and that will bring the coming of Mashiach very soon. All right, so we're learning about leprosy, right? We're learning about leprosy, tzaras. And leprosy is, let's just recap, because I really like when we get like the flow here. We know what's going on. So the Jews built the tabernacle. And then at the end of Exodus, the end of the second book, we started the third book of the Torah. What's the first topic? Is the sacrifices that are brought inside there. We followed up the sacrifices, the animals that are brought as sacrifices, and then we told you what animals you could eat. So what about other animals? Like, yes, there's animals you're allowed to eat. You have to choose certain animals, you have to choose certain birds, you have to choose certain fish. Then we followed that up with which animals, and don't just are kosher or non-kosher, they will actually make you impure. If you touch or carry or eat a carcass of a certain animal or a certain bird, you can become impure, you can become tamei. And then we said, well, there's also other things that make you impure. And we started learning about the laws of impurity. And we said, when a woman has a baby, we learned that a woman becomes tamei, becomes impure. We discussed it in an earlier class. And then we wanted to say, not just as that, there's something in the olden days which we do not have today, which was a spiritual element. Though what's really cool about it is that it actually came out physically in your body. So if you did something, if you were something spiritually sick, there's a number of places in Torah that a spiritual thing would directly affect you physically. And if you gossiped or so on about somebody, you would break out with a very interesting leprosy. And you would have to go to the doctor, and the doctor would be a Kohen, not a regular doctor. Only a Kohen was allowed to be the doctor. The doctor would have to go to Kohen school, or he'd have to get assistance from a rabbi who knew the laws, and the Kohen would determine, listen, you just got, you have a rash, or some other kind, you got sunburn, or you got a cold. You know, when you get cold, you get white. When a person, God forbid, gets frostbite or whatever, some other kind, or do you have the spiritual element and you go to the Kohen? And we're learning about the medical book now that the Kohen uses to decipher studies in order to determine what you have or not. So we are learning about different ways. So we learned yesterday there were 4 grades of color white, if you remember, right? There was snow white, which is as white as snow. That's the whitest, strongest white. Then there's a little bit, a drop shade darker was wool of a baby sheep born. The wool is very white. That's the next shade down. Then we said that there is another kind of white, which I think was then the whitewash. When you wash, there's like white on the soapy water. There's a certain color white. And then the third grade was on the egg. There's a certain part of it that has that white, the membrane or something like to the egg or something like that, and that's white. And those are the 4 colors. But what was guaranteed to determine that you have taras, okay, was that if there's a black hair turned white, no question about it, you have taras. God forbid you have a black hair. You broke out with this white frostbite or white kind of rash, and now it took a black hair and turned it white. No question that it is taras. But the problem becomes, what happens if you got the lesion, the taras, the leprosy on here where there was hair already? Does it have the same rules? And here he says no. And that's what we're going to learn about today. Someone breaks out with leprosy on an area which is on where he already has hair. Well, first we're going to talk about if a guy got a burn and then it came out, this lesion. Okay, that's topic number 1. Then we're going to talk about where you grew hair. A guy got, God forbid, a burn, right? They got a bad burn on his hand, somewhere on his body. And then the burn starts to heal, and the flesh, when you get a burn, it burns the skin, and then the healthy flesh comes back. But instead of coming back as healthy flesh, unfortunately, Baheres Levana Adam Demes Oy Levana, he breaks out with one of those white blotches or he breaks out with a pink blotch. Now, pink, even though we keep on saying white, pink is like white here because what happens, as I told you, did a painting last week for my mother's birthday party. We had a painting. We said that if you mix red and white together, you get pink on the Levana Adam Demis. So because he had a burn there, his skin is like more red. So the shade is not going to be the regular white. It's very possible it'll be pink. An interesting fact here that Rashi tells us, he asks an interesting question. He says that we're going to learn that there's a minimum size that this blotch has to be considered taras leprosy. So it can't be like a size of a freckle. That's not going to count. It has to be about, it's called the size of a grease. So it's, I think we said it's a little bit smaller or bigger than a bean, I think. Maybe like an olive. I'm sorry, a little bit smaller than an olive is the size here that we're talking about in these rules, in these halachas, that it has to be around the size. But the problem is, what happens if he got two different kinds of leprosy? Each one was a half of an olive, and together the two different kinds of leprosy make up one olive. Is he pure? He's impure. Of course, the Torah, the rabbis are going to figure out all these good questions about you're impure. So a guy broke out with two kinds of leprosy, half of one and a half of another, and he says they do not combine. You have to have a complete gris size, which is a little bit less than an olive. You must have a complete gris size in order for it to be of one kind of leprosy, in order to be considered you have leprosy. If you only have half of one and half of another, it's not considered leprosy. Anyway, continuing right along. Verse 25. So the guy comes to the kohen, right? He had a burn, and the burn turns out to be pinkish white, a pinkish or white spot. V'raisa kohen, and the kohen sees him. V'hine, and the kohen looks. Nefach seir lava babeheres. There's a white here in the burn. Umara almoik min ha'ar, and the whiteness on the skin, as we said in yesterday's chumash, that the whiteness looks deeper down because a lighter color looks deeper than a darker color. So it has all the telltale signs of tsaras, of leprosy. The black here turned white, and the white looks kind of lower than the rest of the skin around it. Tsaras, it's for sure tsaras. You got all the telltale signs of leprosy. But michva parcha, it just that the leprosy came out in where you had your burn, but it's not a burn. You're questioning, is this a scab of the burn, or is this actually or is this leprosy? Well, you did have a burn there, but guess what? If it's a black hair turned white and the white looks shallower than the rest of the skin, that's still leprosy. It just grew on where you had your burn. Timei Sakoin, and the kohen will tell you, you're tamei, nagatzarasi, you got a lesion of leprosy. Verse 26, but what happens if the kohen looks at your skin condition? You don't have the telltale sign of the white hair. Shvala eina min ha'ar, and the whiteness does not look like that shade, that the white is kind of lower down, doesn't have that grade of white, that shade of white, that min ha'ar lower than the skin. V'ikeya, and it's kind of like, it's dimming, doesn't have a strong white, like a bright white. So the kohen says, look, you don't have the white here, and it's kind of diminished from the color that I would expect it to look lower than the rest of the skin. I'm not sure, I don't know. So the kohen puts you into quarantine, right? We're learning a lot about quarantine now, also in the Torah. And the kohen looks on the seventh day. After quarantine, he pulls you out and takes a look. Did it spread? Did the leprosy spread out of the original mark? So let's say it was the size of a nickel, and now he wants to see, did it get the size of a quarter? If it got larger, then of course your tummy, again, that's another telltale sign that it's leprosy, the fact that it grew. If it would just be a burn, it would just stay and scab at where it was. It wouldn't continue to expand throughout the skin. It's for sure leprosy. So you don't have the white here, but it's growing after we quarantine you, and therefore we know for sure that this is leprosy. Verse 28, but if after 7 days of quarantine, it didn't move, didn't budge, and it still has that weaker shade of white, says hamichvahi, then you know what? It must have been the way your burn turned out. It's getting weaker. It's not growing. The kohen says, listen, mister, you're pure. It's some interesting kind of a scab on your burn. It is a scab on the burn, and therefore you do not, my friend, really have leprosy. You simply are have a interesting scab. That's the outcome of your thing, and we clearly identify that again by the signs of the scab, because the telltale signs of leprosy is if the black hair turns white, or if the or if the leprosy is continuously expanding, and we know that that's the issue. Verse 29: Isha, and a man or a woman, now it's going to change. If you have the leprosy on your head where your hair grows, or vizakan, or a male on his beard, do the rules change, or do the rules still apply? Black hair turned white, saras. Black hair not turned white, we don't know. Lock him up. Then we got to see if it's expanding. So the kohen looks at the guy. As a nega, he looks at the leprosy. The kohen does his inspection. You come to the kohen for an inspection. And the white looks like that gray shade of white that looks deeper than the skin, because it's a good bright white. And it has a golden here, a yellow here. It has a yellow here. Rashi is going to tell us that this actually also includes green or red. And the kohen says, Mr. Your tummy, when the lesion comes out on your hair, on your head, or your beard, we do not look anymore for a black hair turned white. That's on the rest of your body. But if it's on your head or your beard, now we're looking for a yellow here. Rashi says it even turns the shade of red or green. The kohen says, oh, the telltale sign of leprosy on your hair or your beard, on your head or your beard, is this yellow shade. Nesaku, it's going to be called a different name. It's not called what we've been calling it before. It's called a nesek. Saras haroisha zakonu. It's leprosy. It's a lesion. It's saras of the head or the beard. So that's the name of this kind of blotch. When it's on that area, it's called a nesek. Verse 31. And the kohen will see it. But what happens if, when the kohen looked at it, it didn't have the right shade of white as the blotch, and the hair didn't turn the color? When the kohen did the examination, and he saw the nesek, the shade of white on the blotch doesn't make it look like that right grade, bright white that makes it look deeper than the rest of the skin. And it doesn't have, and there's no black hair in it. But if there is a black hair, that clearly gives it away that it's not leprosy. So if you have a hair in there, I believe that's the case. Let me just double check. If you have a hair in there, then there's no way it's leprosy. If there's a black hair in there, it's not leprosy. So my guess, if it's a person that has black hair and grew a blotch there and the hair is still black, then the kohen right away says, no, you don't have leprosy. This is not it. But if there's no black hair, he quarantines the guy, locks him up for 7 days. Why? Because he doesn't have the telltale signs. It's not no black hair, which would clearly tell the kohen that this is not leprosy. And it doesn't also have the yellow hair and the shade of white that would be lower. And the kohen's like, I'm not sure. I don't know what this is. And what does he do after quarantining for 7 days? He takes a second look. He wants to see if the hair is expanding. The kohen takes a look after 7 days of being quarantined. He sees, the leprosy is not spreading. You had this mark. There's no black hair in there, but there's no yellow, or they're not giving it away. And there's no yellow hair in there. And the shade is just not the right shade. That's a strong white to make it look like it's lower than the rest of the skin. So now kohen's what does he do? So kohen's got to lock him up for a second 7 days. Another quarantine. His gilach, he shaves the hair because it's on the head or the body. You know, like when you do a surgery, but here you don't shave the leprosy here. You go around the blotch of leprosy. You do a good shave around that area. You leave 2 hairs. I don't know how they did this exactly, but you leave just a little bit of hair around that area. Why do they leave hair? A drop of hair, 1 or 2 rows, just 2 hairs around that infected leprosy area. And they want to see if the leprosy will expand to those hairs that they left right next to the blotch. So let's read the verse inside. They shave the guy. But don't shave the leprosy blotch. Leave that. Put him back into quarantine for another 7 days. After 7 days, he comes out. Verse 34. and they left 2 hairs around that area. They want to see if it's going to expand to where the 2 hairs that they left at around the blotched area. And the kohen is going to see the leprosy, the nesek, this because it's called a nesek. Remember, we said this leprosy blotch is called nesek when it's on the hair, the head, or the beard. He looks on the second, after quarantining for the second 7 days. It didn't spread. We have the 2 hairs. It didn't go to where the 2 hairs were outside the blotch. It also doesn't have the shade, the bright white shade that makes it look deeper than the rest of the skin. The kohen says, Mister, you are pure. It didn't grow. You don't have any yellow hairs, I guess. I think that would be a rule here too. He goes, he has to go to the mikvah. He washes, he puts his clothes in the mikvah, and he's pure, even though he never had leprosy. But since you were quarantined, once you're quarantined, you got to go to the mikvah anyway. But what happens if the lesion, the blotch did spread, it went onto the 2 hairs that you were left around, but after he became pure, it continued to expand. And at any point in time, after the first quarantine, the second quarantine, after the whatever time it is, even after the kohen said you're pure, and then all of a sudden it starts to expand once the kohen said you're free to go and you're pure, which is the verse talking about over here. Any point, you have to go back to the kohen. If the kohen, it goes back to the office of the kohen, his inspection office, and he goes to his place. And the kohen looks. I know I said the guy's pure, but it's now it's spreading. It took 2 weeks for it to spread, but now it's spreading. Even though there's no golden hair, even without, I guess that's the point here. It doesn't need a golden hair. If the lesion after 7 days is continuing to expand, after 14 days to continue to expand, even once you sent him home and you said you're pure after 2 weeks of quarantine, you said it's not growing, you're good. And now it's expanding, even with no golden hair, yellow hair. I mean, you still are impure because the expanding lesion is a clear indicator of, even without the yellow hairs, it's still a clear indicator that you have leprosy. However, if the lesion stays in one place and a black hair grows in it, it is cleared. Taru, he's pure. The kohen says he's pure. I actually have to correct something I said before. I made a mistake. That I think, as I'm seeing in Rashi now, if you see the Rashi that I have on the screen, that I made a mistake before, that the red and green here are not a clear indicator of impurity. I was wrong. The red and green here are a clear indicator of purity, like black hair. So see, verse 37, he's saying, if the appearance of the nesek had remained the same, or if black hair had grown in it, and then if you look in Rashi, Rashi says even green and red will actually say it's clean. So it has to, I made a mistake before, it has to be yellow in order for it to be impure. Any other color, black or green or red, I don't think it means you dyed red naturally, so I'm here turn red. And that would be the problem. Okay. The issue is yellow, which looks like gold, and so on. That's the issue of the here that Hashem makes that lets us know we have leprosy. Another interesting Rashi here is, so what if the kohen is a good friend of the guy? You know, he pays him a couple bucks, and the kohen says, "Look, you're going to come to my office. You know, you slip the kohen doctor, a couple bucks, and you say, look, here's $100,000. Do me a favor. I have a wedding tomorrow. Don't say that I have leprosy. I won't be able to go." And the kohen says, "Oh, he's clean." So the Torah is telling us, you see the second Rashi on verse 37, even a kohen that says the guy's pure, he's not pure. If he's impure, it doesn't help. So if he's an impure guy, it doesn't help. You can't buy the kohen off. You either are or you aren't. It's not about if the kohen made a mistake, I guess, even, or so on. If you're impure, and that's it. Still go to the kohen to check you out. You don't go to the dermatologist, you go to the kohen, but the kohen also can't be playing games because it won't help. Verse 38, 2 more verses. What happens if a guy has a bunch of blotches of white spots? It's a different kind of leprosy, a bunch of spots. He says, I think like freckles or like, like a bunch of spots on his skin. Maybe like chicken back. Similar idea, but they're white. They're white spots. Verse 39, but he looks at them and they say, they're not the bright white, they're dim white spots. Boyhak, it's something called boyhak, pigmentation. Parach ba'or tarhu, this is not taras, this is another kind of sickness. which because it doesn't have the right kind of shade of white. It's clearly not that bright white. Or he says sometimes when you look at freckles, if you have two darker colors like freckles, and you look at the skin in between those freckles, he's basically saying your skin looks more white, because if you do comparative, a lighter color to a darker color, by having two darker colors next to a lighter color, that makes that lighter color look lighter than it really is. So if you take something dark and light next to it, by the way, it works the opposite too. If you take something light, take a white paper and put it next to something of a color, it makes that color more bright, because you're comparing it to the white that looks more bright, because you're comparing it to the white color that's next to it. The same thing here is also, it looks like it's white on the skin, but it's not really white. It's really not it. Now, tomorrow's Chumash, we're going to learn about what's the remedy. So what do we do with the guy? What do we do with him once he has, we've been trying to figure out how to figure out if he has leprosy. And tomorrow's Chumash, with Hashem's help, we'll learn about what exactly do we do with a guy that we actually confirm that he does have leprosy. And that is the end of today's Chumash. Any questions?